So this is in two parts, and the first part we call My Plan After 50. As you get to age 50, there needs to be a plan getting developed for how you're going to transition to retirement when you do, whether that's, call it financial independence, but when you can slow down at work or change jobs to do something you enjoy more, or quit altogether to do things you enjoy all the time. But the thing is to not run out of money before you run out of breath. I don't have the clicker. Here it is. First time I've used one of these. So 3 phases of your retirement, your investment life. You accumulate, so you build it up, then you have to transition to distributing it, and then when your retirement ends, whatever's left gets transferred on to your heirs or your beneficiaries. And during each of those phases, you need to use different tools to get the most out of that phase. I'll go pretty quick because it's been, y'all have been very attentive. So your parents' generation, most of them had pensions and then Social Security, and they could depend on that for their retirement income, so their investments weren't as important to having a good retirement. But that has changed for most of us. Some of us are still very lucky, blessed to have a pension, but that's not a lot of us. Social Security is still important for all of us. And then, so your investments make up the biggest part of your retirement. So two key questions we want to answer. What do you need your retirement income to do, and what do you want it to do? Separating needs from wants with your cash flow is really important. So the need, we want to find out what can you not do without in retirement. You gotta have food, you gotta have a place to live, you gotta have electricity. Most of us have to have internet. So gotta pay your property taxes, as was talked about. You gotta have your homeowner's insurance, right, as Mike just said. So those are your needs. You wanna add those up and know what your needs budget is, and that's your paycheck. You need a paycheck to cover that once you stop earning a paycheck. And then we want to know what your wants are. So that's your play check. What are you going to have fun with? Okay, now some people have told me that they had an affliction that needed to be under the needs categories. It was GOLF. Someone else told me, and I don't think they're in this room, that told us that they have a need called watching the Green Bay Packers play at Lambeau Field, right? So anyway, needs and wants are dependent on you and your goals. So when you have needs, we want to cover them with protected sources of income to make sure they're covered. And so in our industry, the only thing we can say guaranteed about is annuity income, or maybe life insurance. Somebody correct me on that. But it's really, you can look at different ways to protect your income, okay? That doesn't use that, but we'll get into that. So Social Security, you all know about it, so that's a big deal. Pensions, not many of us have it. Annuities, that's the last way we can provide guaranteed income. So back to Social Security, really important decision for each of us to make. And if you wait longer till you're 70, you get more payment from the government, but you had to spend your money from 62 to 70. If you take it at 62 and you die early, your spouse gets less. So what do you do? What do you do? And that's why this is so individualized about which way to approach this. It depends on what you need. It's you. Yeah, I don't have to say our clients. It's you, whether you're clients or not. Another thing that's really important is the 5 years before and after retirement is called the red zone. I don't remember who said that in the paycheck. I don't remember the referral of who came up with that. But it's critical. This is when things can go wrong and have the biggest negative impact on you, is this red zone. So the success of your retirement can often depend on how much guaranteed income you have And have you taken key risks off the table? I'll just say this as an aside. I have a client that we protected all of their income that they wanted and needed. And so when the markets were volatile, they didn't really care. They just lived their life and had a good time. It's a position of strength, right? Anyway, so this is a great picture. The main purpose of guaranteed income is to minimize these key retirement risks, and Mike just talked about long-term care risk in great detail, so you're up to date on that one. Longevity risk. What if you live longer than your pile of money can support? What if the market doesn't perform as expected? What if you're taking too big a withdrawal rate against what your portfolio is able to generate? What if you do the wrong investment? Any of you all remember the Facts of Life TV show in the 80s? Remember Blair, Lisa Whelchel? Well, she put all of her money she made from that, got talked into putting into a real estate thing, development in Southern California, whatever. And 20 years ago, she didn't have any money. She was riding around the country in an RV with her husband and homeschooling her 4 kids because it didn't work out. Anyway, there's another story about Kevin Bacon, but oh yeah, Bernie Madoff. Okay, moving on. So, inflation risk. What if inflation's higher than anticipated? We've seen some of that lately. And then the sequence of returns risk. So, from this list, which one you think is the number one risk?
There might be a prize involved. Somebody has to answer.
Yeah?
I'm going to say the investment mistake risk.
That's a big one if you do make the wrong decision, yeah.
Long term.
Good to think about it. Let's see what it says, right? You ready? Longevity. Why? Why? It multiplies the chance the others happen. That's why. That picture. Oh my goodness. So, yeah, if you can take longevity risk off the table, then you'll be in a much better spot. So, what are ways to do that with your retirement income, your investments? Well, you can do an income annuity. It's a contract with an insurance company. They promise to pay you. Social Security, the government promises to pay you. A pension, the business you worked for promises to pay you, or their pension company. Insurance company, you can buy your own pension. They promise to pay you for a guaranteed period or your lifetime, which is what we were talking about. You can, this is a promise to pay. A CD, right? It's a promise of the bank to pay you, backed by the FDIC. So you could ladder out CDs for your expected life expectancy. Sorry, Department of Redundancy Department, y'all remember that one? But you can do that, and they're not guaranteed, but very secure. Government zero coupon bonds. We just had a client a few months ago, liked interest rate environment, laddered out 26 years of their expected income, including inflation, expected inflation, to lock it in, thinking these are good rates, best I'm going to see the rest of my life, let's do it. So anyway, and this is also not guaranteed, but you can add tactical investment risk management to your approach to try to avoid the catastrophes in that red zone and outside of it. So, sequence of return risk, this is big, and most people don't get this. A lot of advisors. I started with American Express Financial Advisors in '99 in the DC area, escaped DC back to Iowa, which is a great place to be, raise my family. And then at the bottom of the tech bust, I left them and went to work with Edward Jones in Cedar Rapids and transferred out here to Edward Jones. So I know what American Express would tell you to do. I know what Edward Jones would tell you to do. I also know what a lot of other folks would tell you to do across the industry from being around this long. So does Andy and everybody else. Anyway, what is not taught so often is sequence of returns risk to advisors or to clients. So during accumulation, the average rate of return is what matters. When we transition and start taking distributions out, what matters is something else, lowering that risk. So let's talk about two hypothetical investors. Investor A starts with $250,000 at age 65, potential retirement, right? Going out 30 years, pretty reasonable to get to, that's going to last, the money will last longer than the person. Sorry, it's not a nice way to talk about it. I like to say, what is your expected retirement end date? So that's what I do. Anyway, so this person started off and times were good. They got good rates of return at the beginning and bad rates of return at the end. The second person, it just flips. You see the same numbers? Same numbers. We just flipped them in different order. Bad rates of return at the beginning, good rates of return at the end. During a accumulation phase, which one do you think had the best result?
Center one.
I just did that mostly for you to think. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Withdrawals.
Accumulation phase.
Yep.
They weren't taking any income. They're just letting the pile grow.
Now, this one's less happy when we talk to them today, right? So, but it ended up in the same place. So let's go through this. While taking income, same scenarios, age 65, $250,000, we're back to taking 5% withdrawal rates as the expected withdrawal rate that should be sustainable with where interest rates are now and everything. And a 3% increase to keep up with inflation. So there's the withdrawal, there's the rate of return for investor A. They start off strong and ends, it hurts at the end, but they still have $700,000 left over. Investor B, however, is drawing off of this pile that lost 17% and then 12% and 3.5%. And that's sort of what happened, you know, in the 2000 to 2003 and 2007 to 2009. So their pile got smaller, they're drawing an increasing amount of money off of it, and so they're done 16 years, 15 years into it, nothing left. So this is why sequence of return, when you're withdrawing, really matters. So what we want folks to think about is that you have money set aside with reliable, dependable, protected, guaranteed, whatever words you want to use, income to cover your essential expenses, things you can't do without. And then your diversified portfolio can cover your discretionary expenses, your wants, and any legacies you want to give and have. And then, of course, you got to have your base, is your cash reserves, your emergency fund, that sort of thing. So you need to work with someone you can trust, that you can tell them and get to know all your business to give you the best advice possible. And it really isn't a do-it-yourself project. There's so much to know. There's so many ins and outs. That's why we know what we do, and we still work with specialists. You know, it's like your guests we just had. So what we do is we meet with folks, have a discovery meeting. We get to know your goals, what you want to do, get to know what your tools are to make those goals happen, and develop a plan for you. So that's that part. Tyler's going to hook me up with the next part. Any questions on that? Between you and lunch, so I'll keep going. We'll move quick. I got 3 minutes. I don't know if I can do 3 minutes. But RIA group, that's us. So we identified about 10, 15 years ago that things weren't working like we were told they're supposed to work, okay, in the investment world. I see some nods, thank you. So let's go back to 1985. CDs, whole life insurance, government bonds, this is, you know, the basis of someone's retirement and investments was that, with a little bit of, you know, utilities or big dividend stocks there, and maybe a little bit in high risk. Why? Well, CDs paid 10%, and the S&P was at 167. It worked. That's why people did that, because it worked. So this is important. So 1995, if you had your portfolio 100% in bonds, you could get 7.5% with a risk of 6. That's just standard deviation, volatility of the portfolio. By 2005, 10 years later, you had to have half your investments in equities to try to get that same 7.5% rate of return, and your risk went up by 50%-ish, okay? And then 10 years later, 2015, well, you can only have 12% in bonds that are promised to give you the money back, right? To get 7.5%, and your risk has now almost tripled. That's harsh. You're just trying to get to retirement after working so hard. So the way our industry has approached solving this is to say, well, let's figure out if you are a low risk, medium risk, or high risk investor, and let's put 60% in bonds, but the rest in a diversified portfolio of different kinds of stocks, large, mid, small, value, growth, US, foreign, emerging markets. At American Express, we had 22 different asset classes according to a efficient frontier of, this sort of stuff. It's standard deviations. We can put it all together, and it's a miraculous answer. And what happens? They all go down together. Didn't matter. Did not matter. Bonds went up. That's the red line. And in 2022, the bonds didn't even go up for us. Stocks and bonds went down double digits together. So if you want more return, you do have to take a little more risk. We just said, to get return, we got to have stocks if we want 7%. Bonds are paying 4%. So we want to try to have growth returns with conservative risk. Well, how do we do that? Instead of doing this thing with the diversification and the pie chart of different kinds of stock, we use different types of stock strategies and equity strategies in our models that we use. And I'm trying to be sensitive to time, so I'm going to keep trucking. All right, so we decided, if you also believe like us over 15 years ago, 10 years ago, changes here, the old ways of doing it may not work, volatile times, you got to have some protection from massive losses. Not minor ones, massive ones. That price matters only in the absence of value, and you want something different to happen, you got to think and act differently. So our approach, market often declines less than 10%, 3 times a year, and goes back up. It just does. It has a 5%, there are 3 5% declines a year on average, 1 10% or greater every year or two. Since 2018, it's been a little more choppy than that. Okay, and declines of 20% or more usually only happen every 3 or 4 years, unless you get COVID, or you get the tariff tantrum, or you get, yeah, thank you. So our solution is to have a plan that's well researched to take a meaningful portion of the portfolio and move it to cash and or conservative stock strategies when it looks like the risks are greater than we should be taking. And then also on the flip side, when a lot of strategies are good at that, but they're terrible at getting back in, is to know when do we need to buy with both hands, buy aggressively. And we had that opportunity just here last February to March, and then April, that last April, okay? So this is a chart of the S&P 500 from 2007. This is a 50% decline, gross, right? And the green periods just is when we were buying aggressively. The white periods is when we have a normal portfolio. And then we have these very brief periods that could be bad, where we go on defense, want to raise cash. When we do all that, we end up with this as a result. With our strategy, we could give the program to anyone. It's not hocus pocus, and they could get the exact same results. Okay? It's math. We've worked decades to perfect this. Anyway, this shows the yellow line here is the S&P 500. You can see it going from 100 to 400, whereas the area chart is our multi-index model of using ETFs to be in and out of the market, different kinds of exposure to different parts of the market. You can see here in 2022 where things were flat, and you can see how we bought the dip and it really rallied coming out of that dip. Right now, year to date, our main model that includes our stock models, if you'd owned it all year, is up 27%, minus the cost of doing it. The market's up 14%. So here I was working at American Express, just got hired right here at the top, so it's my fault that the tech bust happened. And 50% decline. This is 57 from high to low. I switched to Edward Jones. Said, they know how to open and run a business. I'm going to go work for them. And they do. But we got to 2007, 2009. We had another 50% decline in there. None of them told me anything to do other than have your clients hang on and buy more. None of the investment companies we work with, dozens and dozens of them, did anything to help us avoid the pain of 50% drawdowns. So I started looking for an answer. I started trying to work within Edward Jones for an answer. I could not find it within that structure, because you can have whatever color you like so long as it's black. So 2017, I was introduced to ABO Research, and Andy brought me to work in the independent RIA world, where we can actually take a big chunk of your portfolio and put it in cash if that's what we need to do for your best interest. So bear market math. You have $100, you lose 50%, which has happened twice. Okay, we've had 30% just in 2022. You're down to $50. And people think, well, I made 50% return, I'm back. You're not. You're only at $75. You need 100% return. So that's why our strategy is to just try to avoid the major catastrophic losses, not every little wiggle, okay? So that's what we do. There's a disclaimer. Thank you so much for your attention and time.